The FIA have strengthened up the tests when it comes to the deflection of the rear wings, as they weren't very happy with what they saw in Australia regarding this. It seems like Red Bull were right after all, and we can now understand why they were so positive in terms of closing the gap to McLaren. But with China and Japan likely to be races in which teams like McLaren are going to lose a bit of performance, is this going to be enough to shake up the pecking order, or will the MCL 39 remain as the most dominant car on the grid? There is no doubt about it, the rear wing deflection has raised the most questions during the 2024 season, and just when we thought it's all over and the FIA brought a solid solution, things have stirred up again in Australia. Reports state that the governing body were not happy with what they saw from certain F1 teams in Melbourne regarding the small gaps that were still opening and reducing the drag of the car, and that is why they've strengthened the rules and the tests for the next two races. This came after the FIA requested the teams to use cameras to monitor the on-track deformations of their cars during the practice sessions in Melbourne. When analysing the footage, the governing body came to the conclusion that there is more than enough evidence to implement tougher tests on the upper rear wing at the next event in Shanghai, even though all of the cars in Suzuka were deemed to be legal. Due to the proximity of the Chinese GP, we might not see a lot of change in the performance of the car, but from Suzuka onwards, the distance between the main plane and the flap, which is also known as slot gap, must not vary by more than 0.5 millimeters when we arrive in Shanghai. Due to the proximity of the Shanghai GP, an additional 0.25 millimeters will be added to that limit, but the 0.5 millimeters will continue from Suzuka onwards. The official letter, which has been changed after the Australian GP, wrote, having analysed footage from the rear wing deformations combined to the static deflections measured inside the FIA garage in Melbourne, the FIA has concluded that sufficient ground exists for a tougher test to be introduced for the forthcoming Chinese Grand Prix on the upper rear wing. More specifically, Article 3.15.17, introduced in 2025, states that if 75 kilograms of vertical load is applied on either extremity of the rear wing main plane, the distance between the main plane and the flap must not vary by more than 2 millimeters. For the forthcoming GP in Shanghai, this limit will be reduced to 0.5 millimeters. Due to the short notice for Shanghai, only a tolerance of 0.25 millimeters will be added to this new limit. The teams were informed of this revised test early Monday on 17th of March. The FIA wishes to further confirm that during the Melbourne event, all cars tested against the requirements of Article 3.15.17 and found to comply. Therefore, all cars raced in Melbourne were deemed to be legal. This is also an interesting talking point because there is literally no reason whatsoever to change the rule if you haven't seen anything suspicious on the rear wing of the cars. Of course, the situation can vary, but considering the fact that Red Bull were very vocal about this issue through their technical director Pierre Wash, it's likely they knew something we didn't, and they might have gotten their upper hand to it. We might not be laughing towards Wash too much now and label him as helpless because of the statements he's made, and when addressing the flexibility of the rear wings that he noticed on the McLaren and Ferrari cars in the pre-season testing in Bahrain, he went on to say, "It is still going on. I think Ferrari and McLaren are doing the mini DRS stuff still." Now, these stricter tests being applied very early in the season could only mean one thing. The cars that have allegedly exploited the rulebook's loophole are going to see a big drop in performance. But there is another factor as well. China is a difficult circuit, one that should give us a dry conditioned race and one in which teams like Ferrari will have a lot to prove. However, if we are to remember the statement from Wash not that long ago, he accused the Maranello team of benefiting a lot from the mini DRS effect as well, which means that they might find it a bit harder to perform once the regulations strike in the next couple of races. With the confirmation of the FIA that everything is being run properly from the teams, it will be interesting to see how they're going to act regarding the front wing flexibility as well. The initial projection was for us to wait until the Barcelona GP, which is the 9th race of the season, before any checks were implemented. There are also cameras on the front wings that are monitoring the flexing in the low and high speed corners, and with the FIA implementing this solution on the rear wing as well, they might receive more than enough information as to whether teams have been exploiting this rule to a great extent. And Helmut Marko is probably the happiest man right now because he's been the loudest voice in the paddock apart from Pierre Wash, who stated that the gap between the MCL 39 and the RB 21 can be reduced to a significant amount if these regulations are put in place. Of course, many dubbed him to be delusional back then because they were believing that the veteran Austrian is trying to lobby to the FIA because his team is lacking performance. But now that it's been proven this is not the case, the new guidelines of the FIA will certainly affect Red Bull's fiercest competition. The question is whether or not the entire performance gain of the Woking-based squad lies here in the rear wing deflection, because we've seen that when it comes to tyre degradation, the team is on another planet. This has been admitted by Verstappen, as the four-time world champion stated that he simply didn't have the tyres to hold on to the McLarens, and once the rubber started to wear off, the MCL 39 proved to be much more dominant, pulling a 15-second lead over him. Elaborating further on this and giving a damning prediction for the foreseeable future, Verstappen said, "It was a good result for us and an enjoyable but hectic race. It was hard for us to pass the McLarens and we were struggling with the tyres overheating and tyre degradation. I think this is even more evident on intermediates as the compound is even softer than the slicks. They were better at controlling the temperature of the tyres and were pulling away from us quite easily, so it will help a lot if we work to keep our tyres in a better window." So how will the teams respond to this change by the FIA? Obviously it's going to be a massive one because it's been implemented at the very start of the season, and what's even more important is that teams have been given the green flag in Melbourne but have been asked to make additional changes in the race that comes 1 week after the Australian one. It's quite confusing, but it doesn't come without its own reasoning. We are here to see how the teams will navigate their way through with the new rear wing, but what we saw and heard from Vasseur is that we are going to see a new Ferrari from Shanghai onwards, and we should forget about the Australian GP in general. The upcoming race in China is going to give us a much different picture because of its nature and the drier temperatures, and with the air being colder, teams like Mercedes might find themselves in a much better position than where they were in the scorching heat in Australia. Of course, there is a long straight in Shanghai that will be the benchmark of the rear wing flexibility, and if Red Bull turns out to be right, then we are definitely going to see a different version of Verstappen, one that will be even fiercer to what we're used to. But Ferrari have given us a lot to think about because while they just had a season to forget, they are also focused on the upcoming race in China, where the hopes have been brought to the absolute maximum. Maybe these hopes came before the latest clampdown of the rear wing flexibility, and that will be something that time and the performance of Leclerc and Hamilton will tell. But nevertheless, the FIA has proven once again that they are sick and tired of seeing these loopholes being exploited, which is why the following two races will give us a better picture as to whether Red Bull were in the right to protest the rear wings of their rivals, starting all the way in Bahrain's pre-season testing. With all this in mind, do you think that the FIA has made the right decision regarding the rear wing flexibility? And if so, which teams do you think will lose and win the most from this change? Let us know in the comments below, and if you want to know more about Hamilton's anger towards Ferrari regarding the latest strategy blunder in Melbourne, make sure to check out the video that's appearing on your screen right now.